box, or you can raise your hand. And when you're called, then all you have to do is to identify yourself by first name, and we're also going to allow you bragging rights, so you can say, where it is that you're calling from. Now, the focus of tonight's program will be HIC, not just HIC, but we'll be looking at COVID-19 and relationships. You might recall, for those of you who were with us last week, that we looked at, overall, we took an overall mental illness. This week we're going to be focusing on relationships. And just before I introduce my panel, I just would like to open the program by saying that we stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in the USA as they continue their protest for equal rights and justice. And we also acknowledge the fact that this particular Tuesday is being recognized, it's being reserved, but we had this program planned in advance, and we weren't able to reschedule it. So just so our participants are aware that we do stand in solidarity with our brothers and our sisters in the USA. Okay, so to our panelists, let me start with, I'll leave our guest of honor for the last. I'll just say that Dr. Ernest Madu, who is a nuclear cardiologist and founder, chairman, and CEO of the Heart Institute of the Caribbean and HIC Heart Hospital, is going to be with us for a while. Dr. Dania Ball, she's an expert in wellness, cardiac risks, and chronic disease management, and she's also the president of HIC. She will also be making her cameo appearance. Our guest. Now, Dr. Karen Carpenter is the acting head of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, and she's also a lecturer at the University of the West Indies Mona unit. She is a licensed counseling psychologist in Jamaica and a Florida board certified clinical sexologist. Karen also runs the Caribbean Sexuality Research Group, or CSRG, as it's more intimately known, and this is at the University Hospital of the West Indies. She's an author as well. Her books include Love, Sex, the Basics, Questing Caribbean Jewish Identity, Interweaving Tapestries of Sexuality and Culture and Language, and Race and the Global Jamaica. So let me say welcome, Dr. Carpenter. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you.
I believe this is your first time on the program. And of
yes,
course, we'll be a little later on. Yeah, so special welcome to you. Now, we have some questions that we received just ahead of the program, and I'd like to start with those questions. The first one is, how might the COVID-19 lockdown affect communication, sex, finance, and other areas of a romantic relationship?
Okay. Let's leave the communication out of the way for the moment. People use that term communication as a catch-all, not realizing how big a topic it is. So I would want to know what area of communication, but let's look a little bit more at the sex. What was the other thing you said?
It was, I know, it's a multiple part question.
It was a long list. Sex.
Yeah, it was, the first one was in terms of sex, finance, and other areas of the romantic
relationship. So let me begin by saying that sex and finance, we often talk about love and sex and romance, but perhaps we should talk about sex and finance, because sex and money are the two major issues that relationships suffer from. That we have 5 flashpoints that we look for in relationship therapy that tell us about the health of the relationship. And certainly sex and money are 2 of those big ticket items. And within the context of COVID, we need to look at the different, should I say, different pockets of the society. All of Jamaica is not suffering in the same way. All of Jamaica is not experiencing it in the same way. And indeed, all of the Caribbean is not experiencing it in the same way. So for those who have the least income and have worked at jobs with the least paying paychecks, they are actually experiencing it worse than persons who are perhaps paraprofessionals and professionals who earn a steady wage, have a contract, yes, which says that that contract must be honored. And if an employer wants to get out of that contract, there's some clauses that they have to fulfill. With the casual worker, the piece worker, the person who is in a temporary job, they're suffering the most at the moment. And so they're bringing in less income to their families, and particularly where there is only one person earning the income. That has a tremendous impact on the family. Naturally, if you're not feeling buoyant, if you're not feeling happy, if you're not feeling upbeat, if you're worried about money, sex suffers. You know, they say can't make love on a hungry belly. Well, the audience may be too young to know songs like that by Sparrow, but these are some realities. When people suffer financially, they also suffer in their intimate romantic relationship. So I'm not hearing Mr. Cuffe.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was asking, how do you know, these issues differ, or do they differ based on whether the couple is in a long distance relationship, dating but not necessarily living together, or married, or just cohabiting?
Okay, so I would never put just before cohabiting, because whether you are married in an institution such as a church, the registrar of births, deaths, and marriages, or you've made the decision to live in a committed relationship, they hold equal status before the law. So persons who are married in a civil marriage or a church marriage, and persons who live together in a committed relationship enjoy the same benefits before the Jamaican law. And they have one kind of relationship. That's a relationship built on mutuality, reliance on each other. They depend on each other for various sorts of support. So intimate relationship support, financial support, moral support, someone to boost your morale and to say, you know, the other girls and other boys that you need. So in those relationships, you may find that if they've invested enough in what I call the relationship bank, they may actually have some savings stored up. So when they get to those uncomfortable moments, yes, they'll have them, but they probably will get over them faster, which means they're going to draw down on that savings account of emotions. So we have to watch that, because that emotional bank account is running low. We're now more than 2 months into COVID and lockdown. So we know that we have to top up that account a little bit. For people in long distance relationships, I distinguish between relationships that began online and relationships that have now gone online. So if you began your relationship online and you're still online, you're still living in a kind of bubble, a kind of Disneyland, a fantasy, a movie world, because you really are appearing on each other's screens, starring me, yes? And the harsh reality of relationships has not yet filtered onto your landscape. You are still perhaps in that honeymoon phase, and we know that people put a third of the information they put online is not true. I'm going to say that again. A third of the information,
I was about, yes.
A third of the information we put online is not a true representation of ourselves. We may have padded that little romantic resume. We may have oversold ourselves. We may be doing the kind of internet dating that doesn't show the entire picture. Just as you're seeing a part of this room, if I were to show you the whole room, you would go, oh, and you'd have a different perspective. So when we're dating online, we have that very sort of produced for broadcast view of the person. It's a very different thing. So we often say take online, offline as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And
You know, it's interesting.
For those in a committed relationship, think about topping up that relationship account about now, because your partner will have heard sorry too many times now.
Okay.
Yes?
You know, it is said that the closest we come to perfection is on our CV. You know? So
It's on our CV, absolutely. And when we die,
that's right.
you know, those wonderful eulogies. Yeah.
Certainly, the concept of romantic sexual relationships, it was never intended for persons to be constantly in lockdown, as we have seen with this pandemic.
Well, to be fair, you know, romantic sexual relationships have always existed. How we've interpreted them over time is what has changed. So it may have been when we were in the feudal times, when people were living in agricultural areas and farms were far from each other. You would take a trip to Mr. Brown's farm to find some fresh talent, yes? But you would still have concentrated periods of being just with the people who you live with and work with. I think we've become, in our modern day, very spoiled with the number of choices we have for going out, seeing other people, having different activities. But I would say that's a very modern occurrence in the last 200 years.
What I was about to add is that at least Mr. Brown went to the field for a portion of the day, or he went hunting at some point. With
yes,
COVID-19,
he went
the
outside
pandemic is you are literally in each other's faces and spaces.
This is an irony, because I think we've been listening to one part of the precautions and not the other. We've been listening to lockdown, stay away, social distance, wear a mask, wash your hands, sanitizer. But there has been another message, which I don't hear people speaking about as much, which is get some fresh air, get some exercise, go outside, try to stay away from other people when you're outside, go outside with the people that you are living with if you have to be accompanied. But we have been encouraged to go for a walk, get some exercise, and be outside. So I don't think we've publicized that message as much.
Okay, but I'm still thinking that even when you go outside, you're still on the premises there someplace. And since we're focusing on romantic sexual relationships,
yes,
folks who have been in each other's spaces and faces for as long as they have been, I mean, this is something new for a lot of couples.
Absolutely, and that's why I absolutely recommend that people take time away from each other. As I said, even if it means going for a walk on your own, go get that top up, that breather that you need. You know, you've got to have some alone time.
Okay. Now, when you are constantly, again, so that would be one way of relieving that,
yes,
that closeness. But when you are together, let's say, and you share a working space, for example, you know, how do you at that point, you know, how can you still be, you know, together but still maintain some spaces in your togetherness?
Well, again, this is what I'm saying, and I did a program late last week, and I was saying to them, look, if you have to work at the same table, for instance, at home, then try to find some kind of staggered working situation where one of you is working and the other one is perhaps preparing a meal, or one of you is working and the other one is going for a walk. We have to find ways to give each other some space, because we're not accustomed, as you said, Michael, to being in each other's companies this much. It's suffocating.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say, for example, you know, there's a conflict develops between the couple when they're, you know, when they're around each other. Under normal circumstances, you could probably go for a drive, or you could, you know,
a breeze
do
out.
something. A
Time
breeze
out.
out, a cooling out period. Okay.
Yeah.
With COVID-19, I mean, let's say this conflict it happens during a period where, you know, there's a, you know, you're not allowed to go on the streets.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially
How do you navigate, how do you ease the conflict during isolation?
I think the first thing you have to understand about conflict is that it's natural and that people do have conflicts. Even the best of relationships have conflicts. There are different ways that people experience conflicts, and that's called combat styles. That's your fighting styles. So some people fight by blowing up. They're like the box of matches. They're always on fire, right? Mm-hmm. Other people fight by avoidance. They pull back. They go into themselves and they don't want to talk to anybody. And then you have the third style, which is a person who's going to talk you to death about the conflict. Now, when you have two people who have a matchbox each and they both blow up, that's fine. They'll cool off very quickly and they'll forget what they were fighting about. If you have two people who are avoidant, they also work really well because they pull back until they can't reach each other. And when you have two people who talk it through, that's also good. The challenge is to figure out what style your partner has and what style you have. And when the two styles are different, that's when we have prolonged conflict.
Does COVID-19 and isolation present a chance for couples who are not very good at conflict resolution to do so? Is this a good time for them to learn, or what can they learn at a time?
I tell you the truth, Michael. My view is that COVID-19 or any other situation that would have us on a lockdown like this, what it does is it shows you what you are like more clearly if you will listen to the other person. But it doesn't show you yourself if all you're doing is looking at yourself. For every human being, we need someone else in order to see ourselves fully. Jean-Paul Sartre, existentialist philosopher, says that without the other, I can know nothing about myself. The other is essential to my ideas about myself. So if you can take the opportunity to listen to the feedback your partner is giving you, because whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, it is what they're seeing.
Is this what's referred to in psychology as someone who visibility? Someone who can.
It's only visibility. It's only visibility when you also can pause and accept what is being said of you.
So if
you're being defensive, that's not visibility, because what you're saying is that's not me, that's not me, that's not me.
Right.
It becomes visibility.
In other words, this would assume that you trust your partner to reflect accurately what they're seeing. You think they know you well enough so that when you're stepping
let me put it this way. Let me not use that big multi-million-dollar word trust. That's a very expensive word for me. So let me not use that loaded word, but let me say, accept that what they are saying is what they are seeing. You don't have to agree with them. Just accept that what they're saying about you is what they are experiencing. It's neither whether they're right or wrong. And we spend too much time thinking about, is she right? Is he right? Just accept that that is the experience they're having. And
so that's step number one.
Yeah.
So now that you have accepted what your partner is saying, what's the next step?
Well, you could decide whether or not this is a trait you like about yourself or a trait you dislike about yourself. Is this news to you? Is this something that you never thought about before? And that might be the time now for you to reflect and say, well, how am I grumpy? The partner can then say, when I saw A, B, or C, or when you did X, Y, or Z, and most of us say, you always do so-and-so, you never do so-and-so. And that gives you some idea of what they're talking about. Now, maybe you were not being grumpy. Maybe you were deep in thought. and you just responded in a way that they didn't like, it gives you an opportunity to clarify. But if we don't allow people to speak, we can't clarify.
Okay, okay. Next question from one of our participants. How can people with kids maintain partner relationships when they can't necessarily go on a date night? You know?
Okay. I disagree that you can't go on a date night. I absolutely disagree that you can't go on a date night. One of the things that I've noticed with my friends and colleagues who have young children or children who need supervision is that the kids are being allowed to run riot. The kids are staying up until 11 at night, 12 at night, all sorts of ridiculous hours. Yes? Because parents can't bother to fight with them because there's no school to regulate them. I say you have to have a schedule. You may want to be more lenient than you were when the children were going to school at 6 and 7 and 5 in the morning. But there must be a cutoff time for people under 5 foot. If they're under 5 foot, they need to be in their beds because you also need a break. You need to breathe. So allow yourselves at least an hour, whether together or alone, that you don't have the children around and you're awake and you're able to sort of cool down from the day before you think about going to bed. We have to have, children love order. We have to have some order.
Okay. Just a follow-up on the whole question about children and partners. How do split families work during this time? For example, if you're divorced with shared custody, how do you ensure you're doing the right thing if your former partner has a different perspective?
We're always going to have differences in perspective. One of the things that is a real ideal that I try to encourage couples that are apart, that have children to do, is that I try to encourage them to not argue about each other in front of the children. If you can delay the conversation about, I don't think you did the right thing, until the children are not around, you will appear to be in solidarity. And there will be those moments when you need that other parent to back you up. But if you've been picking at each other in front of the children, it's going to be very difficult to back you up afterwards. Yeah? So try to keep your disagreements private between the two of you and not have it affect the children. Too often we're quarreling with each other in front of children. But children don't see us making love. So they only see us when we're in a disagreement. They don't see when we're making up. And that's not fair to them because we're giving them a false impression of what relationships are about.
Okay, so let's assume, for example, that it didn't quite work out that way. I mean, you lost your cool and an argument ensued. How would you, do you have a responsibility to have a conversation age appropriately with the child/children?
In an ideal world, and a world that I would prefer, you would mention to the child at some other point, I lost my temper with your father, I lost my temper with your mother, but I really should have. I'm sorry I lost my temper. Whatever set of words that you can use so that that young person sees that you're not always right and that you give them permission now to not always be right. They can come to you when they're wrong about things and say, Mom, Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't do the right thing. We have to lead by example. Whatever it is that we are doing is what the children will do. It's not what we tell them, it's what they say us do.
And this should be not just with COVID-19, but just about.
Well, it's a general rule of parenting. If you want to parent honestly and you are thinking about the fact that your children are not always going to be children, they're going to be adults one day with children of their own. So we have to keep in mind that we're growing citizens. And you'd like them to behave in ways that are agreeable, acceptable, and peaceful, then you're going to have to demonstrate that for them.
Okay, let me just break for a moment here on the questions, Karen, just to say to our participants that remember this program is for you. And if you have any questions around our topic, which happens to be COVID-19 and relationships, that's our focus. We're speaking with clinical sexologist, Dr. Karen Carpenter. And if you have any questions, you know what to do. Just raise your hand in the chat room. And when we call on you, you identify yourself by name and location, and we will be very happy to take your questions. Okay. The other question I have here: there have been social media reports of exes reaching out to ease lockdown loneliness, or in some cases, attempting to rekindle romances. Is this a common occurrence when people are navigating difficult times in their lives? And what should their response be to these overtures?
Well, I don't think we can prescribe for grown adults. Anyone over 18, we cannot prescribe for them what they ought to do. Is it natural for people to reach out to exes during a period like this? It may be that during this period we're reflecting more on our relationships that we've had in the past. We're living in our memories more because we're not creating new memories at the moment that perhaps fill all the criteria that we want. Because as you say, we're locked down in the home. So we're looking for the more colorful memories that we have. And yes, perhaps it is natural that we think of those people and we reach out to them and say, how are you doing? Whether or not they should re-engage, I simply couldn't answer that. I think the only comment I could make is whatever the reason was that you left, as you always say, Michael, it's the same reason you leave again. So consider carefully why you ended the relationship and whether or not that reason is something that's still on your, on your taboo list. If it's something that a deal breaker for you.
Just remember why you left in the first place.
Remember why you left, as you always say, and decide.
Speaking of leaving, Doc. Speaking of leaving, you're slowly leaving us. We're down to your eyes now. In a little while, you're likely to disappear. So you might need some quick adjustment there. I'm not too sure.
And yet, I'm not seeing that. But are you seeing that?
There you are. You're coming back nicely. Go back up a little bit more. And
I haven't actually moved.
Well, I'm not sure what's happening, but yeah, I'm looking. So I'm not sure why that is, but all I'm seeing,
it may be the display. No. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, whatever you did just now before, though, it was
it worked.
It worked. Okay, so you might want to do that a little bit more. And while you're doing that, let me. Rochelle has a question.
Hi, Dr. Carpenter.
Okay. Hi. Yeah, hi, Rochelle. Go ahead.
Good. How are you? Great information so far. So I would like your feedback on single women navigating dating during this time, especially because we can't necessarily go out and socialize as much as we would before.
Absolutely.
So what are some tips you would give?
Yeah, and it depends on whether, Rochelle, you're single and beginning your dating online, or you're single and you were dating someone and you're continuing that relationship online for the moment.
Oh, no.
So I would
single and wanting to like meet and that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to be using our chat rooms more. We're going to be using dating apps more. There's some excellent dating apps out there where I would rely less on Instagram and Facebook as a good idea of the resume, and I would rely more on the conversation I'm having with the person. I think we have to be a little bit more inquisitive when we're dating online, ask better questions. Yes?
Yeah.
And perhaps the flirting will not take as long as it would do in person. Why? We can flirt so much and no more when we're not getting a context. Yes?
Yes.
So when we are dating face-to-face, we can go on a long drive. And I know several gentlemen who tell me a long drive is their way of knowing if they can be with this person in silence, have conversations, etc. Yeah? So we can't do that long drive online. but we intensify by spending long portions of time with the person. I suggest that you do some activities with the person. For instance, I recently said to a couple, why not, if you both like to cook, and they did, why not buy a cookbook that both of you can share? Order it on Amazon, both of you share it, not too expensive, and then prepare a meal together online.
I love that.
You would be surprised how many things you're going to find out about that person, because to begin with, they're not intently trying to impress you. They're having to think through something else. So how well do they handle the challenges that they're facing with that cooking experiment or whatever? And you see a lot about their personality in that moment. You get me?
Yeah, I love that. That's a great.
If you're going for a jog, take them for a jog with you. Yes? And you can both set out to go for a jog together. So little things like that, although they're virtual, they tell you a lot more about the person and their environment, which I really want you to see. I want you to see the whole room,
Yes.
not just a camera. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So
They may, as a matter of fact, they may sound like little things, but in the long run, or not too long run, they turn out to be really big things.
Absolutely, because context is so important. I can clear the area around me and I live like a pig. And until you see the whole room, you can't tell. Yes?
Okay. Yeah.
So get some context in there so that you can better assess the person. Do some do some nice online quizzes together as well.
Yeah.
Not because you think the quizzes are super accurate, but because doing the quiz will tell you about the personality.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rochelle.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Most welcome. Okay, so Patricia has a question. Patricia, thank you for joining us. Welcome. And go right ahead with your question. Hi, Patricia. Okay, fine. I know that Dr. Dania Boy is there with us someplace, and usually she has a ton of questions. So let's welcome her into our discussion. Hi, Dania.
Hi, Michael. Hi,
Dania.
How are you doing, Karen?
I'm very well, thank you. Good to hear you.
Yes. Today is one of those days that I was running behind the 8 ball, so forgive me.
Oh, wow. We have those days, yes.
Yes.
We have
But
two very
thank
powerful
you so
women
much.
online,
It's
so
been
go right ahead.
fantastic. I've been commenting, and I really like your cooking idea, and I'm very tickled by seeing the whole room. So,
Oh, yes.
yeah.
Yeah, I believe in that.
Yes. So I know Patricia Reed Wall, I think, had a question. I'll turn it back to you, Michael.
Is she ready? Hi, Patricia.
Yes. Okay.
Hi, Patricia.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm great.
The question I wanted to ask you is in terms of the frontline health workers.
Yes.
How do they really handle you having to isolate themselves from their spouses and children over such an extended period in order not to risk, infecting them?
Great
well,
question.
Yeah, I think they're using the same means that we're using a lot. They're using a lot of video. They're also thinking about the better good. Because if you keep in mind, for instance, let me give you an example. On the weekend, I decided to take a little trip. And the place I went to, the young lady who was attending to me, very attentive, but she had her mask on as a chin guard. So it was under her chin. I don't know if she was trying to exercise this area of her face, and she wasn't covering her mouth. I asked her why she was doing that. She quickly put it back on. So when I went to pay, I said, I just want to say something to you. You're not wearing the mask for yourself. So thank you for wearing the mask for me, because you wear it for your customers. The healthcare workers understand that they're staying away from their families for their families. They understand that they are acting in the best interests of the vulnerable members of their families. And while it's difficult, it is more difficult for them to face the fact that they would have infected a member of the family. So you see what I mean about the better good? Sometimes we think about the better good.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Okay.
Those
Go ahead,
poor
Patricia.
children- No, I'm just saying those poor children, even, you know, if the parent might have to come and be in a part of the house that, you know, they are not, it must be extremely difficult for those relationships.
Absolutely, it is difficult, but again, the better good. There's so many things that all of us have stopped doing. And I think that when you are on the front lines, this is part of your training. You understand when you volunteer for this kind of work, that this is part of what is required. It's not easier, but it does make you rationalize it if you like.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Patricia.
Good question.
Yeah. Thank you. Question, Karen. Can a married couple who have both recovered from COVID start having sex?
Well, I don't know why they stopped having sex. Yes, sex is great for pain relief. We know that it helps ease the pain. One of the things that came out very, very early in the COVID situation is that we were looking at how to have sex. Not if they can have sex, but how. So you may want to, avoid any transmission of fluids. So you will want to avoid kissing. You will want to avoid some of the foreplay that may reinfect you if one of you is further along in the disease development than the other. But I'm understanding this to be both persons are infected, yes? And if both
I think
persons
what
are
I
infected,
think what well, no, it just says can a married couple have who have both recovered from COVID. So the assumption is that they both had it and recovered.
yeah,
I
I didn't see any guidelines that prevented sex during COVID with both persons infected. It simply said we needed to avoid further transmission. So the very things that we're doing to avoid transmission, I mean, as ridiculous as it might seem, you may want to have a covering over your mouth or choose positions that don't allow for the droplets to be passed on. Yes?
Yeah. I think possibly one possible thought that I have regarding the question could be that I think some weeks back we asked the question about if the virus was is there a possibility it could be
Of
transmitted
reinfection?
fluids? And you know, if it could be transmitted during fluids. So I guess I'm trying to remember, and maybe Dr. Ball or
And I was about to say, Michael, that the further thing that I would recommend, even for the pleasure aspect, is the use of condoms. There are many wonderful condoms on the market, and this might be a new thing, especially for a couple who's forgotten what condoms feel like. They're ticklers, they're condoms that delight, they're condoms that excite, they're hot and cold condoms. And then you jump right in.
No, I have nothing to add. Michael was asking about exchange of fluids. Well, I'm reiterating that I understood the question to be they were both infected and now both in recovery. And so there really is no...
nothing to prevent them.
Nothing to prevent at that point. However, one is infected and the other is desperately trying to avoid infection,
that's a different situation,
Different situation, because even if they avoid fluids, there is still the respiratory part of it. And so I noticed that you'd said earlier about cooking online, for example.
Yes.
So I would probably extrapolate that to that they can cook in a different way.
Definitely, they can get it hot. It can get hot in here in a different way. I think we can say words. I think we can say words like mutual masturbation.
There you go.
Mutual masturbation, self-pleasuring, doing that via the camera. even if you're in the same household but in different rooms. I've seen of people self-isolating. So if you're self-isolating, you can use the camera to help stimulate yourself and your partner. And that's very useful as well.
Yeah. Okay. Let me just go
I'm
to the
allowed
question
those
here.
words, Daniel.
Siobhan? Siobhan White has a question. Hi, Siobhan. Thank you for joining our discussion. Go ahead with your question.
Hello?
Siobhan?
Yeah,
Yes?
hi. Yes, go ahead with your question. Welcome.
Good evening. How much of a
Good
pleasure it
evening.
would serve me, especially I want to get that special touch from my wife.
Say that
Sorry,
again, please.
could you
Say
repeat?
that-
I said, good evening again. I said, how much of a pleasure that will serve me if I just want that special touch from my wife and she's in the same space. Wouldn't that be felt uncomfortable?
Well, the question would be, I think Dr. Ball was referring to one partner being infected and one partner not being infected. You got me? So if one of
Okay.
you is infected and one is not, and you're self-isolating, meaning that you're in the house but not in the same room or bed, yes, because you're trying not to
Yeah.
infect the other person, then we can resort to using the phone camera, etc. Clearly, if both of you are not infected, or you both have recovered from the infection, or you are both infected, that doesn't apply. Then you're beside each other. Yes?
Mhm.
So we're just talking about a case where the person may be infected and trying not to pass on that infection to their partner. Does that help, Siobhan?
Yes, miss.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, Siobhan? Hi, Siobhan?
As a
I
single person this time,
Yeah.
what are some advice to manage being alone?
And do you mean alone sexually or being alone and lonely?
Can be both of them.
Okay. So clearly, just as we're doing here now, Siobhan, where we're reaching out to each other on social media, you will notice that the social media bandwidth has become less reliable at certain hours of the day, especially when people are leaving offices. You find it harder to get on because when more of us are online, it's harder to get the bandwidth that you need. But we've been using the online contact for those of us who are on our own. Yes? Equally, if you are feeling that you have desire, but again, you're on your own, then I suggest self-pleasuring because the desire will go away for a while, but it's likely to return again. It is very natural, normal, and healthy to feel sexual desire. This is part of what human beings do. Without sexual desire, we disappear from the planet.
That's true, but in some religious quarter, they are saying that that's not right.
I can appreciate that some people have religious reasons or other. They may not even be religious, but find it uncomfortable to self-pleasure. So those persons will have to find ways of moving their mind away from what the body demands, because a normal, healthy body demands sexual interaction. Yes?
Okay.
So they will have to find other outlets. Now, we're very limited in what outlets we can find when you're locked down in a closed environment. I've been suggesting.
Siobhan?
Yes. Go ahead.
Siobhan?
Yes, sir. What are some benefits of doing that self-pleasure to yourself? What are some of the benefits one can gain from that?
Self-pleasuring is both beneficial and useful for a number of reasons. One, we have sexual desire, which is normal, natural, and by engaging in self-pleasuring when we cannot have a partner, it helps us to have the body perform normally. That is the normal function of the human body. Second, it helps us to, let me finish. It helps us to get rid of the buildup of sperm, which you are producing if you're normal and healthy in your 20s to 30s. You're producing about a teaspoon or more of sperm every night. Yes, your body produces sperm every single day. For the woman, she matures into adulthood and she keeps her eggs for life. But her cycle will have times when she's more sexually interested than others. And third, for all age groups, self-pleasuring is known to give you a better night's sleep, and particularly as you age, it helps in your sleep patterns. So there are many benefits.
Example, so what if I live with my wife and say we live for 50 years? One of us can't do it again. Would you recommend self-pleasure?
I would recommend self-pleasuring, and hoping, if you were coming to therapy, I'd be hoping to involve your partner in the activity in some way so that there can be some mutual pleasure. Yes? I would be trying to get your partner to assist in that process in a way that both of you feel that loving exchange between you.
You know, Siobhan, final question. I'm just make a final comment here quickly before we wrap and take another question.
Okay.
Do you know of persons who have been forbidden to self-pleasure by the church? Siobhan? Okay.
I think the question was for you, Siobhan.
I wouldn't.
Yeah, I was asking, do you know of anyone who has been forbidden to self-pleasure by the church? We're not hearing
Okay,
each
we're
other.
losing you on the second half of that question.
Yeah, I think you said Mike.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone personally.
Oh, you don't know anyone personally? Yeah,
No, but
because, you know, the reason I'm asking.
But being in a Christian community, we understand that. They teach us that is not right.
Well, you know, what I would suggest, given against all the medical information that Dr. Carpenter just gave us, what would be the alternative to self-pleasure? You know, what do you do? Because you're talking about a normal, natural body function here. It's not something that you dream of. It's something that biologically it happens naturally. So when it happens, what do you do? You see, I don't know what the suggestion is that you should do, but it would be interesting to know that. Anyway, Siobhan, thank you very much.
Thank you for raising that, Siobhan. Thank you for raising that.
Thank you too.
Yeah.
I will continue listening.
Yes,
thank
that's
you very much.
important information.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Doc, another question here from a participant. Do you recommend going on dating apps right now, since people cannot go out and meet people as much?
Absolutely. I always recommend dating apps. I particularly recommend it in the present situation. I think you have to be choosy, and I think you have to be clear what it is that you want from the dating apps. There are various dating apps that serve different purposes. Yes. And if you are thinking of a long-term partnership, then Match.com, eHarmony, that sort of well-known and reputable app is one that I know many people who found partners on. Our caution always is take online, offline as quickly as you can. So in the present dispensation, we have to wait until the airlines have opened up again if your online dating is between two countries. If it's in the same country, then clearly once we have freedom of movement, you can begin to exercise some caution, but meet up for a coffee, meet up in the middle of the day, no commitment sort of thing, and move from online to offline quickly.
Would you recommend, or what would your thoughts be regarding persons who, let's say, in this period of isolation, would it be a good idea to isolate with in-laws, or with in-laws? Let's say. Let's start with in-laws.
Well,
is that a good time?
I think a number of people were forced to isolate with the persons that we're caring for. I know a number of my friends whose mothers, fathers had to come and stay with them because during the period of lockdown, they could not leave their aging parents, relatives, aunts, uncles, etc. on their own, because moving from one area to the next was difficult. So rather than have the challenge of them being completely isolated and left alone, they brought them into the home with them. So we're going to have to do a readjustment again as we move out of the COVID period. And some people will not leave their in-laws to go back to the situations they were in before.
Now, how do you, let's, continue just a bit more with the in-laws question. Let's say, I mean, in real life, I mean, there may be some friction within.
Oh, that always happens. In fact, sorry.
In the best of regulated families. So how do you manage that situation?
With care. In-laws are one of the 5, or in-laws is one of the 5 flashpoints that we have for relationships. And the 5 flashpoints are these. We have sex, we have money, we have in-laws, we have how the children are raised, and who does the chores. And those are the 5 flashpoints for relationships.
And flashpoints are?
Those are the things that crop up the most in relationship therapy. Outside of sex, which is sex therapy. If we're just talking about relationships, these are the big 5. We call them the big 5. Yes?
Okay.
So in-laws are in there, but it's sex, money, how we raise the children, in-laws, and who does the chores. Those are the big 5. Okay. So in-laws are always going to be a difficult situation to incorporate in a modern Western family. There are families, however, where the in-laws are part of the family. And it's very much expected that you're going to live with your in-laws. And they seem to manage. So I think it has to do with how intrusive your in-laws are, how much space you're allowed, both emotional space and physical space, and how much of your lives are intertwined. I think we need spaces between us.
So when you're in that situation, okay, since you can't avoid it, the in-law is there, but the in-law is now interfering. And let's say it's the husband, okay? The husband's mother is there.
Or the husband's father.
Or the husband's father. Okay. Okay.
To be gender correct. To be
gender balance.
Yes,
Gender balance.
yes.
I appreciate it. Okay. The either the father or the mother is kind of putting some, making suggestions. In other words, running the house.
They'd like the house run the way they would run a house.
How do you deal with that responsibility?
I think it's
is
for
it the husband's role to,
all right. So the person whose parent it is has the responsibility of raising the issue with the parent. It's quite simple. That's
Not
your
the spouse.
responsibility.
Not the spouse.
No. The person whose parent it is has the responsibility of raising the issue with the parent. If having raised the issue, it continues, then I think that individual, that spouse, could stand up for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But first, allow the person whose parent it is to delicately raise the issue in a diplomatic fashion, because you're going to have to continue to live with this person.
Okay.
And I think that person whose parent it is has to have the cojones to stand up to the parent.
Yeah. But, okay, so let's kind of push it just a little bit. Nothing is being done. You're in lockdown. There's nowhere to go as such. The tension is rising. Is there room for the spouse to step in and, say how she's feeling, he or she's feeling?
We have to be diplomatic. We have to remember that families are not chosen, eh? We don't go to the family supermarket and say, okay, I want an in-law who's like this, and I want an outlaw who's like that. So we have to remember that these people are in our lives for good.
There's a job opportunity.
Yeah, so if you can raise the issues, diplomatically, delicately, and without offending, by all means, you're going to have to put down your foot at some point. But do it without an audience. The worst thing you can do is to embarrass the other person. And if someone else is present, they're going to be embarrassed. If you have to step outside the apartment and say, I need to talk with you for a few minutes, or come with me for a walk, because that person may think that they're helping. and they feel
Yes.
useless if they don't do anything. Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
try to
Final
remember
question.
that people's feelings don't go away. Mhm.
Yeah. Final question, Doc.
Yeah.
How do you carve out meaningful time together when you have been in isolation together?
Well, the challenge is that even though we're in isolation together, we're not really in isolation under a beach umbrella with a cocktail in our hands and our feet up in the sand. The truth is we're not doing that. So my suggestion is that we try to find some moments like that, create some moments like that. And if it means that you have to scour the bathtub thoroughly and pour hot water on it, some of us hate baths because we think it's dirty. And then you set a bubble bath and both of you can be in the bathroom together with a glass of wine, just having a chat. Create some moments of relaxation, what I call spa moments. Yes? And you can do it for both of you or one of you. Create some moments that you would have if you were outside the home and looking after yourself. The other one that you can do is the home pedicure, manicure. Create some moments like that where you just take some time for each other. It doesn't require a lot of space, but it does require imagination.
Okay. There's one final question I'm gonna. It's on the same. It's a springboard from the last question, and that is, what if the spouse doesn't see anything wrong with what the in-law is doing?
They rarely will see anything wrong with it. If they don't agree that it's something that's bothersome, then who owns the problem? You own the problem. This person has grown up with this in-law doing these things all their life. So they're quite used to it. So I'm going to suggest that you own the problem. You have to find a diplomatic way of raising the issue with the in-law. And again, make sure there is no audience. Don't shout at them in front of other people. Don't embarrass them in front of the kids. Don't call out your partner and say, well, you won't talk to your mother or your father. Ask them to go for a walk with you. Ask them to sit down for a cup of tea with you. Yeah?
Okay. Yeah. In terms of people on the front line, couples, I mean, they're in the same medical field. Should they take home work and things like that? Or they should try to, find some other way of, just putting work behind them?
That term take home work almost has no meaning anymore. And the reason I say that, Michael, is because most of us are working from home. So there's no take home work. We're all working all the time now. Okay. So I've said to couples, I spoke to a couple just last week, and I said to couples that work from home, both of them working from home, whatever the space is that you reserve for putting on your laptop or whatever you're doing, get a tablecloth, get a bedspread, get anything. And when the day ends, cover the laptop. Cover the space. Ignore it. Blank it from your mind. You cannot work 24/7. You have.
But if you're both in the field and you're on the front line, you come home.
And you come home, then you still have to take the break. But most of us, when we come home, especially women, we have double duty. Women do, by Canadian standards, and these are Canadian women, not Jamaican women or women in the Caribbean, they do 5 weeks work more than men. And this is in a country where men help tremendously. Yeah. So imagine how much more work Caribbean women are doing than their men. And that is not to say that there aren't great Caribbean men who are doing work, but we must recognize.
I'm going to give Dania the last word here, Doc. Dania?
I didn't want the final word, Michael. Karen, I have been fascinated. It is just such a pleasure, because I don't think that many people realize how emotional, physical, sexual health intertwines, and how everything, and how our day-to-day stressors affect all of those things. And so, wow, it was just such an interesting thing to think about in light of this global pandemic, but really to realize that sexual health has been kind of like an underground pandemic for a long time. Because I don't think people understand it well.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would
Absolutely.
hazard a guess that, you know, especially as women age or as you've been married for a long time, sex becomes less important or less, you know, and so many marriages, many relationships are coexisting in the absence of
Sexless marriage. The
life.
sexless
Yes.
marriage. And it's
so
not
it
so
really,
much that it becomes less important, Dania. It's that we find less satisfaction in the effort that sex takes. So we have to find new ways of making it as spontaneous and as effortless. And perhaps have to think about sexuality rather than just intercourse. All of what makes us sensuous and sexual.
Okay. And we're going to leave it on that note. As always, Dania, thank you so much for for being there.
I'm so delighted that was here.
Another dimension to the HIC.
I'm telling you. But you know, we're everything. You know, especially because, and I know Karen, you have to leave, but you know, we didn't really delve into that post MI, like after a heart attack or after cardiac surgery. Sexual health for men especially is something that changes, and you know, adapting to that until things recover. And so we might have to have you back to talk more, because
it would be my pleasure, because that is a serious issue for couples who are recovering together. One person has that episode, but two people recover from it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I thank you so much. And it was a delight speaking to you.
Thank you.
Okay, Dania, thank you again. Dr. Karen, thank you so very much for your invaluable insight, as always. Always a pleasure interacting with you, and continue to stay safe.
Thank you.
And
you
know, Dania threw out the invitation, so we'd like to ask you to keep it open, so that, you know, should we throw an invitation your way again, that you would be willing to join us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I'd also like to say thank you to my producer, who is always on top of things here, Carrie Ann Evans. Carrie Ann, thank you so very much. And I'm inviting and thank you for participating. I'd also like to invite you to join me again next Tuesday at the same time, when who knows what we will have for you. But I'm rest assured we will have another great program here from the HIC Hospital. And that's been my pleasure. I'm your host, Michael Anthony Cuffe. Thank you so much. Continue to maintain the protocols, and I'll see you next Tuesday. Have a pleasant evening.